Hi, everyone. Thank you for your attention and still being here on the fourth day of the Climate Week. And then we hopefully can bring you a very interesting conversation here talking about a very interesting growth stage startup that's deploying their first of a kind in Louisiana. So just to start with quick intros, I'm Mia. I'm Director of Technical Strategy on Newlab Strategic Growth Team. So essentially aligning partnerships and then standing up technical focus areas, determining like what kind of technologies we should be really deploying in our regional hubs. As many of you may already know that Newlab actually just announced our newest hub, also our fifth hub and the third in the US in Louisiana, working with the public and private sector there, really focused on industrial decarbonization, so essentially trying to attract and deploy startups working across industrial power, carbon management, and then marine, and then port utilization, basically in Louisiana. And then I'm sharing the stage with Sutton, who's from Arbor, a very interesting startup, really developing a modular, scalable, zero-emission power generation technology. In Louisiana, also in other regions of the world. I'll have Sutton quickly introduce himself before we dive deeper together.
Thank you. Is that working? Cool. Thank you for the introduction. Great to meet everyone. I'm Sutton Goldner, Head of Business Development with Arbor Energy. And as Mia mentioned, what we're working on here at Arbor Energy is a next generation combustion system that can burn that is fuel flexible and can burn their fuels and capture the associated emissions using an oxy-combustion approach, which is a technology that we really took from the aerospace industry. When used with biomass, this produces carbon negative power with the associated, of course, if you're using sustainable biomass. And of course, with natural gas, it gives you carbon neutral, baseload, reliable power. We're currently looking at deploying our first of a kind commercial system in Lake Charles, Louisiana. It's going to be a 25 megawatt scale system that we're going to be expanding to a larger 100 megawatt facility over the coming few years.
Yeah, amazing. So we'll just dive directly into it, right? Newlab definitely sees a lot of critical ingredients for startup deployment and scale up in Louisiana: infrastructure, industry density, people, just to name a few, right? But then just kind of wanted to also learn from your firsthand experience as a startup founder, right? Like what you are actually seeing, what's your primary motivation to actually think of Louisiana as the next landing point and then to actually deploy your first of kind project?
Yeah, great question. So ultimately, the reason we chose Louisiana came down to risk management, right? We're building projects and risk is always at the forefront of everything we think about and everything we do. And there are enough challenges with trying to get a first of a kind project on the ground. Really, you need to make it your priority to minimize the cash ask and minimize the risk as much as possible. And so we looked at what were the inputs and outputs that our system would need and where geographically would align with these. So our system needs an oxygen input, and Louisiana is one of essentially two regions in the United States that has available oxygen infrastructure that can be delivered by a pipeline. Next, we need somewhere to put our CO2. CO2 Class 6 wells are being developed all over the country. We actually got our start trying to build a project in California. And while there are Class 6 well projects in California being worked on by a number of great groups, we saw a really strong need to be on a pipeline that is being actively developed. And of course, Louisiana has that as well. Those are kind of the obvious physical infrastructure pieces, but there's also a lot of other qualitative nice to haves when it comes to Louisiana. The first is, especially in the Lake Charles industrial corridor, you have an immense amount of really capable workforce and workforce development, kind of an entire ecosystem there. So if you're developing a new first of a kind technology that maybe has job descriptions for jobs that don't even exist yet, you can work with these groups, get trained technicians who are already experienced in adjacent fields, and then give them kind of a smaller amount of training to get operators for your facility. The final area that's really helpful in Louisiana is the regulatory environment. And this is not really supposed to be about, you know, the level of regulation, but really it's more about just the clarity in regulation. Again, at the end of the day, when it comes to project management is risk management, and Louisiana will make it very clear to you what you need to solve, right? You can go into an economic development group, say, hey, this is my project, here's what we see as our emissions, here's what we see as our effluents, here's what we see of traffic and land use, and they'll say, great, and within a day they'll be able to send you a package of these are all the permits that you're going to need to get to. And that's great to have because now it's a checklist and I can put that in my project schedule and it's something that I can really start to attack with my team and think about how we're going to allocate resources. Versus in other environments, it's a lot more qualitative where you can be a meaningful amount of the way through your project process just to have kind of a meeting where folks are uncomfortable with the project and you're kind of in this weird limbo where it's unclear how you escape.
Yeah, thank you, Saturn. I think we just talked about all the good things, right? Apparently, as a founder, right, scaling your technology in a new region of the world, you must have some unexpected challenges as well. Also kind of want to hear from you, maybe like how you are actually dealing with those unexpected challenges, and then also if you have a single piece of advice to the founders that are looking to actually deploy and scale up their technology in Louisiana, what will be your kind of recommendations or suggestions?
Yeah, great. I think some of the things that we've been surprised by, so I'm originally from Houston, which is really close to Lake Charles. Lake Charles is where all the Houstonians go to gamble and drink. So I'm used to being surrounded by this heavy level of industrial architecture, just really in your surrounding. And I think that a lot of folks have this perception that, oh, we've built a ton of infrastructure in Louisiana and we're going to continue to be able to build it with extreme ease. And I think that there's a lot of really active community engagement that has to happen. And that can be really challenging in Louisiana due to the nuances of their history and how they've managed these projects in the past. It can be a really big challenge to know who truly speaks for a community, and that's across any project, right? No matter where you are in the United States, but especially in Louisiana, due to how political power and who's getting assigned to lead these parishes, and are they truly representative of the communities you're working with. Another important thing to keep in mind about Louisiana, right, is when I'm at these conferences, when I'm talking to investors, when I'm talking with project partners, we're of course using the term clean energy. But of course, a lot of these people, their brothers, their cousins, their friends work in traditional refining, traditional chemicals. Those are the bedrocks of these of these parishes. They're not going to want to hear clean in your context because that's going to imply that what they're doing is dirty. When to them, what they're doing is just as important as this next generation of tech. In terms of advice for a new founder looking for Louisiana, I guess who in the room is planning a Louisiana-based kind of pilot project? Folk level demonstration. All right, not as many people as I thought, to be honest. But from what we hear, there is a lot of interest in the region. And I think something really important when you start to talk with folks in Louisiana, especially government level officials, is to be really transparent with them about where your project is, what are your next steps, what do you see the developments being over the next 6, 10, 12 months, right? This isn't a pitch to VCs where you need to puff out your chest and give them the most aggressive schedule that you can possibly whip up and the most aggressive jobs estimates you can whip up. You really want to be transparent with them because that's what's going to allow them to help you as much as possible. Lay out, hey, this is how we see this developing over the next few years, and they'll give you the resources that you need because they are constantly getting asked by a lot of groups who are interested in deploying in the region only to kind of get ghosted by those counterparties. So you want to be respectful of their time, and kicking off a good local relationship, of course, is really important for any project.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. I think wanted to also shift the topic a little bit, right? Just kind of also thinking about scaling a technology. We're really impressed actually by Arbor, right? You're scaling very, very fast since you got founded in 2022. And then I think it's also really because you're kind of stacking your revenue streams, not only focused on carbon removal, but also kind of power generation, clean power generation specifically. I think also wanted to learn from your perspective, just kind of as a founder as well, like how you are actually thinking about prioritizing across these revenue streams, and then how we can really better, how future generation kind of founders or earlier stage startups can really prioritize their resources to pursue the kind of capital stack or kind of business model that could most likely lead them to success.
Yeah. I think you can learn from my perspective, or more accurately learn from my mistakes. When we started Arbor, we were really focused on the carbon removal markets, and I spent a lot of my time and focus on those because those were new, and we knew that we needed to get that right for this to be a company. Kind of to the detriment of us exploring the electricity side. And that really, ultimately we righted the ship, we figured it out, it wasn't a huge problem, but I didn't spend enough time early on considering, hey, what are the other options on the table and how can I bring those revenue streams in and de-risk them to make a lot of folks really comfortable with what we're starting to build here. So I think honestly, it's keeping your head to the ground on changes, right? Obviously we started in 2022 when the conversations around baseload power weren't nearly as interesting as they are today. And so just keep in mind that you're developing your project, no matter what technology stack you're working with, you're developing a project in a dynamic ecosystem. Folks are attacking all parts of your supply chain, all parts of your use cases. And so just keep those in mind and come to events like this where folks are starting to innovate and have those conversations about how these industries are changing.
I think especially through this week, right, that we heard a lot of different messages about the kind of uncertainties about carbon removal, but we always think about it's kind of always going to coming down to the project fundamentals and economics, at how to really scale up a business based on the current market opportunities, and then kind of to really allocate your resources most appropriately to I think also want to leverage from your experience about actually engaging with both actually two almost seemingly separate sectors, right? The power sector as well as the carbon sector. You're engaging with kind of buyers, right? Even in two distinct sectors. Also want to just talking about even advice as a piece of advice also to kind of future founders, right? How do you normally engage with the carbon buyers and the power buyers? What do they actually want to see? How do they consider the fundamentals to kind of really make the decision to invest in a certain technology?
Yeah, that was a huge challenge for us early on, is the purchasers of electric power and the purchasers of carbon removal think very differently. They have different budgets, they have different time horizons, they have different risk profiles that they're used to, and they have very different processes, even down to different legal documents that need different legal specialties to be reviewing them to make sure that you're structuring an agreement correctly. A lot of what it came down to for us was that was a bulk of our job, was just really hashing through that, because a lot of groups didn't want those conversations to be part of one, or sometimes actually when they were one conversation, that confused things even more. I think if I had to give advice to a founder kind of negotiating their first offtake or early offtakes, it would really be to, there's a lot out there about the importance of good team launches or project launches, and a negotiation is an incredibly important time to do that, because once you start negotiating, everything kind of clams up, right? You are at that point now in the negotiation process, and there's all sorts of games and back and forth that's going to happen. But at the start of the negotiation, you need to get some really good information from your counterparty. How long is this going to take, or how long do you think this can take, right? Because if you're a startup, you're probably moving a lot faster than a very large corporate buyer. And being aligned with them on the time frame is good, and also being aligned with your investors on that time frame, right? So that they're not pressuring you to close a deal when you don't have the terms that you quite want. Another thing that's really important to align on, and some of the best contracts we've negotiated actually started with this, was, if you're talking with, again, a large corporate, having that honest conversation of what can we really not touch in this contract and what is up for negotiation. Again, this is something you have to bring up before you start negotiation, otherwise they might think you're trying this game, but there are going to be certain things that if you want to try and change in a contract, they may seem innocuous to you, but that's going to have to go up all the way to the board of a multi-billion or even trillion-dollar company. And that's obviously something you'd really rather not have to do in the middle of a contract. So I think having a really good just alignment meeting at the start on duration, what are kind of the boundaries of this, and doing that before you begin the actual negotiation process are really key parts.
This is very helpful. I'm just kind of being mindful of the time. Probably last question from me, because really want to kind of end on the high note, right? So maybe what's the most exciting thing, the next thing for Arbor, right? Just kind of touch to the topic a little bit as well, especially for Louisiana. What's your next biggest mission or kind of vision that you want to get accomplished in Louisiana?
Yeah, so Arbor as a whole, what next thing we're doing is we're kicking off our technology demonstration in San Bernardino, California, and that'll be the first time we actually have our turbine spinning and can show people. We actually have a delegation coming out from Louisiana to come check it out there. In terms of Louisiana, we're starting to kick off work on our first project there. We're doing wetland delineation studies actively. We've worked on a community engagement plan that's all been kind of in the ephemeral space, but now starting to put that to the road and start to get actual feedback from the community members in a more broad context other than the ones that we've initially met with. So it's those early stage project activities that are going to be really exciting and hopefully getting steel in the ground soon.
Amazing. Yeah, we do have 5 minutes more, so kind of really wanted to open up to the audience to see if there will be any direct questions to Sutton, to Arbor, to kind of learn more about Louisiana in general. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have any additional questions. Go down.
Hi, I'm Maddie Cohen. I am a research associate at EFI Foundation. It's a Washington, D.C. Clean energy think tank. And I was wondering how, if at all, in the few, I guess, since Trump took office, have things changed for you all? Has it been easier? Has it been more difficult? What has been the changes there, and how have you been adapting?
Yeah, I think the most succinct way to mention this is just increased perception of risk across the board, right? Increased perception of uncertainty. Everything from time frames to tariffs, right? Like what happens to your capex if costs increase 30% because that week is a week that we're having tariffs? What happens when you potentially can't get certain permits approved because all of a sudden that's become a political flashpoint? Even things like 45Q, right? I think even though 45Q, for lack of a better term, survived the OBBBA, there's still a much larger perceived risk on it now, and the conversations that I'm having with potential investors and partners now are very different than they were a month ago, even though I'm pointing at the same quantitative facts about, hey, this is why I feel confident that 45Q is not changing. So just a massively increased risk profile across the board, and for long-term infrastructure, that's pretty scary, right? And that's not Arbor specific, obviously. This is across the board, but it's going to be definitely some headwinds that really any infrastructure developer is going to be facing over the next few years.
Maybe one final question, if there's anyone else.
Yeah, my name is Mehdi Rafi. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Gemini Energy. So our first pilot is going to be in Louisiana soon. And I want to ask what the contrast that you see between a California deployment and a Louisiana deployment. Thanks.
Yeah. For us, so we actually started trying to get projects built in Placer County, California. And two of the big shifts were on the pipeline side. So California, as mentioned, has Class 6 wells, but pipelines, CO2 pipelines in California are really just going to be rather substantially delayed. We were also building in a very, very rural region. Again, back to those workforce questions of how are you going to get skilled people to not only build this, but also operate this long term in a region where the predominant economic driver is forestry and then tourism. The other item, and again, this goes back to the regulatory side. I was kind of hinting at this earlier, but the California Environmental Quality Act is a well-sounding name for a very challenging piece of legislation that gives a really qualitative kind of squishy stage in permitting where it can be very tricky to know what do I actually need to do to proceed. And so that's why we decided ultimately to end up in Louisiana. It was the CO2, the CEQA permitting, and then also the oxygen system for us.
Thank you. Very honored to share the stage with Sutton today.
Thank you so much.
And then thank you for everyone's time. If you're interested in Louisiana or Arbor as a business, please feel free to kind of come find us later.